Hi, my name is Virginia McLean, and I am extremely lucky to introduce my aunt, Maysey Craddock. Maysey, a graduate of the class of 1989, designed the river wall on the side of the AWC. She was president of the Honor Council and the co-president of the Outdoor Club here at St. Mary's. Maysey studied sculpture and anthropology at Tulane University, and she got her MFA at the Maine College of Art. She has been doing art since the 90s, and she and her husband, Sean, share a dog, Luna, with my grandparents. Without further ado, Maysey Craddock.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you all for inviting me back up to this podium. I spoke here, I don't know when it was, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. Yes, I'm from the class of 89, which is the last ladies of the 80s, and it's nice to be back. I see 7th through 12 out here and 6th over here and everybody else across the street, I guess. But it's really wonderful to have had this opportunity to create this piece of art for your community and to be back today speaking about it. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, my mom took my sisters and I to the banks of the Mississippi River, somewhere a little bit north of Memphis, I think, to hunt around for fossils in the riverbeds. In my memory, I recall seeing layers of sand and mud and thin lines of small rocks, and then the rocks spilling out onto the silty beach along the water's edge. My eyes were glued to the ground, and scattered all among the pebbles and stones that were worn smooth by the river were the fossils of tiny animals and plants that lived right here millions of years ago when this was the sea. When it was time to go, I really didn't want to go. I remember the feeling of wanting to stay in that mysterious long-ago footprint of the river, looking for clues and stories about the land, and I feel like I've been kind of scouring the ground ever since. Last October, my husband noticed that the river was really low on the other side, in the Arkansas side, right across from the Metal Museum and that big Indian mound that's right next to the museum. We drove across the river and parked under the bridge and walked out onto the riverbank, which spread for miles downriver in huge expanses of silty sand. It felt like we were on another planet. Strange dunes of silty sandbars curved around the edges of cottonwood trees and the remnants of abandoned wharfs, where maybe hundreds of years ago ferries pulled up and left people on the other side before there was a bridge to take people across. Scattered around here and there were gravel deposits, and you guessed it, I was hooked. I found lots of stones eroded into strange shapes, but also old pieces of crockery and what looked like fossilized bones, and even a palm-sized fragment of some kind of reptilian skin. It was like these, you could feel like maybe it was the flipper of a turtle or something. I don't know what it is. I had to tear myself away as the sun began to set and the chilly night started to set in. I have always been fascinated by the idea of layers of time and experience in a place. As an artist, my work goes beyond the paintbrush and the paper. If my work is going to mean anything to me, if it's going to keep me curious and go out into the world with something to say, I have to keep learning. I have to bring new ideas to the easel, so to speak. For an artist, really, the whole world is your palette. Artists make work about all kinds of things. It may be about color and shape and how they relate with one another on the canvas, or it may be how emotion comes through in a portrait, or it may be complex, like art that challenges cultural norms, or explores new ideas in science or astronomy, or even about how we're always walking around glued to our phones. But for me, the ideas I always find myself coming back to and that keep me excited to create are history, archaeology, geology, and above all, the natural world. It is not just facts that I'm looking for, but ways to really understand the landscape that I live in. We live in a city that is perched right on the edge of one of the most powerful rivers in the world. Long ago, this river changed its mind all the time about where it wanted to go. It was a wild river. It moved around, looping east, then swinging west, sometimes with floods spreading out over miles and leaving little lakes and oxbows way off into Arkansas or Louisiana. Now it is very controlled, so that for the most part, we know that all of the towns and cities along its bank aren't going anywhere, that land is land, and that where the water is where we think the water should be. But if you could rise up in the sky and look down on all the paths the water has ever taken, you would see generations upon generations of the river, weaving in and out of each other like a family tree. If a river is left to its own devices and is not controlled by levees and dams and spillways, it meanders. And over time, big, long, millions of years kinds of time, all of these meanders of the Mississippi have shaped and curved and carved and nourished the landscape that we see around us today. There is a beautiful series of maps that was published in the 1930s that shows all of the various courses of the Mississippi River over geological time. Basically, from right now all the way back to before humans walked here, when instead of cars and trains, the land was roamed by mammoths and big saber-toothed tigers and other huge beasts that tromped around on the gravel beds that I like to explore. This map shows a kind of tangle of rivers, all different colors, all kind of weaving together in this braid, each color symbolizing a different time in history. When St. Mary's got in touch with me about making a piece of art for the campus, I thought of this image of the river meanders weaving together and how much it reminds me of all the generations that have passed through these halls and the threads that connect us. This is the idea that led to this sculpture, and there is no way I could have done it alone. I came up with the idea of having 5 separate ribbons of rivers cascading together down the staircase, which is actually way harder than it sounds. The school gave me architectural drawings of the staircase, and with a little ruler with all these different kind of scale measurements on it, I made a model of the sculpture so I could figure out how wide and long each river would be and where it would be attached to the wall. My drawings were translated into a plan by a talented engineer, and then workers at a metal fabrication shop cut about 45 different sections of river out of aluminum. Each one was around 6 feet long, and they labeled each piece on the back according to which river it went with, which was incredibly complicated. And then each river was powder-coated a different color and had rods welded on the back to attach it to the wall at very specific points. And to make things more complicated, each colored ribbon of river is at a different distance from the wall because I wanted you to really feel like they were weaving in and out of each other. So we had to make a template to tell us, actually not me, to tell my husband Sean where to drill the holes for each river on this wall. And Sean coordinated this whole part. He also works with me in my studio. Sean and 2 assistants worked for 2 weeks on scaffolding spread out all along the stairway, which thankfully he did not have to take down every day because, unfortunately, you were all at home on your computers going to class on Zoom. But it sure did make the installation easier. And I think you only made about 3 tiny drilling mistakes. It was very meticulous, but it went according to plan. And my job was to bring lunch every day. It was really a feat of engineering to make and install this piece, and it took the brains and talent and manpower of so many people, but I have to say I couldn't be more grateful to have had this opportunity to see a drawing come to life in such a big way. Most of the time, I make my art alone in the studio, and very rarely do I actually create something with other people and make something that I know will be seen by so many people. This was such a challenging project, but I love seeing these rivers come to life with the input and ideas of so many, and to create something so permanent that symbolizes the intersecting lives and hopes and dreams of so many. It has really been a gift. The river meander, as this sculpture is called, symbolizes the paths of all the women who have studied and struggled and laughed and made friends in these halls, gathering knowledge and experience every day, and then continuing the journey out in the world. I am here today as a former student, and my sisters are here too. One of my nieces graduated last year and is following her own river out west, and Virginia is just beginning her time at St. Mary's this year. 2 generations of mother and daughter, too, are a big part of making this sculpture possible. Nancy Starnes and her daughter Mary Barker Starnes, class of '95, funded its creation, so thank you very much, Nancy and Mary. Each of you here today has your own beautiful, winding, meandering journey, both behind and ahead of you. Just like a river shaping its banks and flowing through the land, so do we, as we learn, grow, and move out into the world, shape the lives of those around us. No 2 paths are the same, but we overlap and intersect. Friendships bloom, and some of these will be lifelong. Each path has its curves and obstacles, sometimes running fast and deep along a clear channel with a purpose, other times spilling over into quiet lakes and streams and places where we reflect and settle. All of these connections, all of these intersecting paths, these are what create the story of this place. I'm just going to close with a tiny quote by John O'Donohue. "I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding." Thank you so much. Go forth, follow your current, meander.